In today's lecture, we're going to be looking at the reproductive system, which is going to be chapter 25 in your textbooks. This is going to be a rather kind of cursory glance over some of the basics, because I'm going to be assuming that you've been exposed to most of this material at some point in your education. And I also really don't think the MBLEX is going to concentrate a whole lot on the reproductive system. So then to get started, when we talk about the basics, we're talking about those male and female sex cells, organs, glands that are going to be needed for sexual reproduction. And when we say sexual reproduction, we're talking about when that sperm and egg come together to combine the genetic material to produce a new offspring. And so looking at the primary reproductive organs of the two sexes, we have the testes in men, as well as the ovaries in females. So with ovaries, we have two on both sides of the body. Within those gonads, we're going to produce the gametes, which are going to be the sex cells. So the gonads of the testes are going to produce the male gamete, which is the spermatozoon, or just sperm for short. Here you can see the long flagella on it. Whereas with the females, the sex cell or the gamete produced in the ovaries is going to be the oocyte. Here we can zoom in and see. Comparatively, the sex cell is going to be the largest cell in the body, where the sperm is going to be the smallest cell in the body. Along with the gonads and gametes, we're going to have ducts that these sex cells are going to travel through. So here we can see the spermatic duct, which connects the testes to the urethra. That's going to go all the way through so it can exit the body. And then in the female, we have the fallopian tube, which is not directly connected to the ovary, but it's very closely associated with. So when the ovary releases its egg, it's usually going to end up within that fallopian tube where it can travel to the uterus to either be implanted or discarded. And then along with the rest of these, we have the accessory sex organs or glands. So in the men, that's going to be things like the penis or the prostate. And in females, it could be things like the vagina, uterus, and breast. Those are the more common ones. There's going to be other ones associated that we don't need to go over, though. And so when we talk about the physiology of the reproductive system, again, the whole goal is to produce offspring. So the fertilization of those sex cells, and then the gestation and nourishment of the offspring until it's ready to be born. And that's what we're going to call pregnancy. Along with that, these sex cells or sex organs are also going to produce hormones like we saw in the endocrine system, where the testes are going to produce testosterone or androgens, and the ovaries are going to produce progesterone and estrogen. So here you can see, these are my siblings or my parents' offspring. That's me, that's my little brother Brandon, and I'm guessing that's my older brother Nate in the background. So good 80s style in this picture. So we're going to first start with the male reproductive system. So we're going to begin by looking at the testicles, which are going to be a pair of oval glands that are located in the scrotum, which is an external pouch. And the reason that the scrotum is an external pouch is because it's going to keep those testicles about 2 to 3 degrees centigrade cooler than the rest of the body. And this is important because it's the optimal temperature for which sperm cells are able to be produced. And the creation of sperm cells, you need to know, is going to be called spermatogenesis. Again, genesis is going to be mean creating or the generating. And some other kind of important structures, along with the testicles, we're going to have something called the epidermis. This is going to be what stores mature sperms after they're developed. A little interesting side note about the medical prefix or the etymology of epidermis. Epi, if you remember, is going to mean upon or on top of, and didymisis or didymis is going to mean twins or double, I believe. So it's going to translate to above the twins, which I always kind of thought was interesting. Connecting to the rest of the urogenital tract, we're going to have the vas deferens, and this is going to be a tube that connects the epidermis to the spermatic duct. So again, we need these ducts to allow the sperm to exit the body. And then very associated, there's going to be different terms for the other areas of the duct. I couldn't find specifically what the spermatic duct is. It's not quite as common as some of the other ducts you see, but it seems to be just a general term for the entire tubing of this area. So again, this is what's transporting the mature sperm during ejaculation. And again, I don't think you're going to get specific questions. So if you see the word sperm and duct, you know we're talking about the reproductive or the urogenital system. Again, we have the ejaculatory duct. So further along the pathway, we're going to have a short tube that passes through the prostate that's going to join with your urethra. Again, the job of the prostate is going to be to release some seminal fluid to kind of assist and nourish the sperm cells. And then finally, the tube that exits the body is known as the urethra, both in men and women. So this is the tube located below the bladder. Here is our bladder there. And connected to the bladder, we have the urethra, which is going to join the ejaculatory duct. So then both urine and semen can exit the body through the urethra. When we talk about sperm, it's only going to make up about 5% of the total volume of the semen. So when we say semen, we're talking about the thick, milky white alkaline fluid. Again, alkaline means that it's going to be a basic pH, so above 7 on the pH scale. So again, 5% is going to be sperm, and that means the remaining 95% is going to be everything else that makes up the semen. And this seminal fluid is going to be produced by glands like the prostate, bulbal urethral glands, and seminal vesicles. Don't worry so much about these ones here. They're not that important. Just know that semen or seminal fluid is more than just sperm. It's just some extra information. What this extra fluid is going to do is it's going to have some fructose, which is going to be what helps nourish the sperm cells. So you can get energy from fructose. You have prostaglandins. If you remember, prostaglandins are going to be a local hormone. And besides being associated with inflammation and some other things, it's also going to stimulate smooth muscle contractions along both the male and female reproductive tract. So that's going to be important to help mobilize these sex cells. Fibrinogen is going to be something that helps temporarily clot things in the body. So in this case, we want to create a clot of semen once it's inside the vagina. And this is what's going to help it prevent it from leaking back out. That's the last thing you want to do. You want to keep that sperm inside the female reproductive system so that it increases the probability of meeting up with that egg cell. If it just leaked back out, it would never happen. And again, it's going to be alkaline. And this is important because it's going to both neutralize some acids that are found in the prostate gland as well as in the vagina. The vagina is going to have an acidic environment, which can kill the sperm cells. So having the semen being alkaline is going to help prevent the destruction of sperm cells once it's in the female reproductive tract. Again, looking at the sperm, this is our male sex cell, and its job is to carry the genetic information. So we're going to have 23 chromosomes within the sperm cell, and it's going to meet the 23 chromosomes within the female sex cell. And importantly, it can migrate and swim. So this long tail, or the flagella, is going to be what allows the sperm cell to move through the fallopian tubes in the female reproductive tract. And as we said, spermatogenesis is the creation of new sperm cells. And this begins at puberty in men, and it's going to continue all throughout life. So new sperm are going to be made every day from basically teenage years all the way to the day you die. I don't know too much about the specifics, but I'm pretty sure they're finding that in older men, there's going to be more kind of damage to the sperm, and this might lead to more congenital issues with offspring of older men as opposed with younger men. So you always hear that a lot with female eggs. As the older they are, the increase for problems with offspring increase. I think they're seeing some correlation with older sperm with certain congenital diseases or genetic diseases. I don't know too many specifics about it, though. And then looking at the penis, it's fairly simple. The distal end is going to be known as the glans, extra sensitive area. And then the rest of the body of the penis is going to make up everything else. And this is where you have columns of vascular tissue that fill with blood and that cause the erection. So if you didn't know, there's no bone inside the penis that makes it hard. It's going to be all flow of blood that creates an erection. So here, if we look at a cross section, we can see those large columns. And these are what are going to engorge with blood during arousal. Starting with the female reproductive system, then we can see the ovaries, which are the paired glands located in the abdominopelvic cavity, lateral to the uterus. So here we can see the uterus in the center and the ovaries on the lateral aspect of it. And they're going to possess both endocrine and exocrine functions. So endocrine meaning that they're going to secrete those hormones, exocrine meaning that they're going to secrete that sex cell, and it's exocrine because it's going into a duct and it could leave the body during menstruation. So looking more closely at what the ovaries are producing, they're going to have what we call an ovarian follicle, and this is going to be a fluid-filled sac that contains the oocyte. So when you start, we have our primary follicles here, and then once a month we're going to choose some follicles and produce eggs from them, so immature eggs. So that oocyte is an immature egg. The body is going to produce about, I think I saw something like 15 to 25 of these immature eggs, and one of them is going to be the chosen one that develops into a mature egg that we call the ovum. So if you ever heard, when you're a baby, you're going to be born with about 400,000 of these follicles or immature eggs, and that's why by the time you're about 45 or reach menopause, you used up most of those eggs, because about once a month you're going through about 30 of them each. And then once we leave the ovary, we're entering that fallopian tube, which is the passageway into the uterus. And these are going to contain cilia to help move that egg along. So if you remember, cilia are going to be those fine hair-like cellular extensions that aid with movement in the body. So they're going to aid the egg towards the uterus. So here we can see what I want you to know is the fallopian tubes are going to be the site of fertilization. So this is where the sperm and egg are going to meet. So here we have our egg. It's going to be released into the fallopian tube where it meets our sperm cell, and we have fertilization. And if you've ever heard of getting your tubes tied, technically known as tubal ligation, this is going to be a surgery where we basically physically cut the part of the fallopian tube. So you can either cut it, tie it off, or probably do all three of the above, as well as cauterization, burn it. And this is what's going to prevent the egg from ever reaching the uterus. So you would never have fertilization take place because the egg and sperm physically couldn't meet each other. Moving from the fallopian tubes, we now enter into the uterus, which is going to be a hollow organ where the fertilized egg can implant itself. And this is where the fertilized egg would gestate and grow during pregnancy. And there's going to be 3 layers to this uterus. This innermost layer is going to be called the endometrium. Again, endo meaning inner. The middle layer, the muscular layer full of smooth muscle, is called the myometrium. And the perimetrium is going to be the very outside of the uterus. There's also going to be different names for the regions of the body. So the center is known as the body. The very top region is called the fundus. And this bottom region is going to be the cervix. And this is going to be where you find a sphincter that allows access into or out of the uterus. And then at the very end, we have the vagina, which is going to be the canal that extends from the cervix of the uterus to the outside of the body. And you can see how we have these different folds within the vagina. And these are going to be called rugae. And you're going to find rugae in other areas of the body as well, like the stomach. And what rugae are going to do, they're going to allow for expansion of certain types of tissue. And this is going to be important because during childbirth or during intercourse, you're going to want the vagina to be able to expand to accommodate what's going on at the time. We also have Bartholin glands, which are going to secrete mucus. Anytime you find mucus, the body's trying to kind of lubricate the area. In this case, sexual intercourse, you're going to need lubrication. And then looking at the external genitalia, everything together is going to be termed the vulva, so the collective term for the external female genitalia. And then specifically, there's going to be something we call the labia majora, which are going to be the 2 large folded skins extending from the mons pubis, which is here on top. This is considered the equivalent of the scrotum in males. And then on the inner side, we have the labia minora, which are the 2 smaller folds of skin on the inside of the labia majora. And then we have the clitoris, which is a small cylindrical mass of erectile tissue. So here you can see clitoris here. And what's kind of interesting is, you always see this external tiny part, but if you dissect it, the whole inside part, the clitoris is much larger than anyone ever really thought. I think it wasn't until the mid or late 1990s that anyone ever actually dissected the clitoris and we were able to see just how far the nerve endings extend. So the clitoris itself is going to be equivalent to the glands of the penis. So again, important for sexual arousal. So it's going to enlarge during tactile stimulation and plays a role in sexual excitement and orgasm. And then the space between the vaginal opening and the anus is going to be what we call the perineum. This is, I won't say important, but during childbirth, this area is known to tear because the baby is so large, the vaginal calc sometimes can't accommodate everything, and so the tissue around it can tear. So sometimes doctors will surgically cut that area before that happens, and that's going to be called an episiotomy. I don't know if they do this as much as they used to. I think natural tearing is considered the better option because it seems to heal a little bit better because you're not going to be cutting nerves naturally as opposed with surgically. Looking at the female breast, also known as the mammary glands, again, mostly made of adipose tissue, but their job is going to be to produce milk and secrete milk after pregnancy. So again, the production of milk is going to be called lactation. And they're going to lie superficial to the muscles that are underneath. So that's going to be pectoralis major as well as serratus anterior. And then the nipple, the darkened area around the nipple is going to be called the areola, so the pigmented area. And the reason they think it's pigmented is it kind of gives a baby a distinctive area to look for so it knows where to go to find the milk source. That's one idea. We also remember the nipple is going to have some apocrine glands, so it's going to secrete some oily fluid to kind of help with any chafing from breastfeeding as well. Now we've come to the part of the class where the male teacher can lecture the predominantly female massage students about the menstrual cycle. So we're going to go through this fairly quickly, but when we talk about the menstrual cycle, we're talking about a series of hormonal events that are going to begin during puberty, and the menstrual cycle is going to last or occur around the average about 28 days. Obviously, this is a kind of average range. Some people much shorter or longer, but about once a month is considered average. So when we say menstruation, this is going to be the periodic discharge of that endometrial lining from a non-pregnant uterus. So when that egg doesn't implant itself, all the lining that we build up to kind of nourish it is no longer needed, so the body's going to get rid of it. And that what that kind of process is, or that fluid that's being released, is called a menses, which is about 150 milliliters of blood, tissue, fluid, mucus, and endometrial cells. Again, that 150 is average. Some people have heavy or lighter flows. And what I want you guys to know is that there's 3 phases to the menstrual cycle. So I want you to know the order in which they occur. Not so much what happens in them, just that it goes from follicular, ovulation, and luteal phase. And then when you go through menopause, this is going to be the cessation or the ending of the menstrual cycle. So women post-menopause will no longer have a period. So looking at the first phase, the follicular phase, this begins with menstruation and lasts for 13 days. So it starts the first day of menstruation as day 1 of the menstrual cycle. So this is when the ovarian follicle begins to develop. So if you remember when we looked at the ovary, we have that tiny primordial or primary follicle starts, and it's going to become larger until we develop into that ovum. At this point, we are releasing both follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary, and this is what's going to create estrogen to stimulate the uterine lining to proliferate and thicken and prepare for the possible fertilization or implantation of the fertilized egg. The second phase then is ovulation. So once these follicle cells have developed into a mature ovum, we're now ready to release it from the ovary so it can travel down through the fallopian tube. So we're releasing the ovum during ovulation. The ovum is going to travel down the fallopian tube towards the uterus. And what I want you to know is this is when fertilization can take place. Along with the ovum, the follicle is going to collapse in what's known as the corpus luteum, and this is going to secrete hormones to help that ovum through its course. And again, when you see ovulation, this is when you're thinking possible fertilization. So this is the part of the cycle where fertilization can take place. And then the last phase, or the third phase, is going to be the luteal phase for days 15 through 28, so the remaining days of the cycle. Again, that corpus luteum is going to secrete estrogen and progesterone to maintain that uterine lining for any implantation for pregnancy. Progesterone is going to elevate. This is what's going to raise the body temperature. So the same way a chicken sits on an egg to incubate it, progesterone's job is to increase the body temperature to help incubate that egg and help it to grow. But if the ovum isn't fertilized, hormone levels are going to decrease. And eventually that endometrium is going to shrink and die off, and this is what leads to menstruation, where we discard that unneeded endometrial lining out of the body. And so with that endometrial lining, the unfertilized egg is going to be flushed out with it. Very briefly, we can talk about sexual intercourse. And when we say intercourse, we're talking about the insertion of the male penis into the woman's vagina. And it's going to be impulses within the spinal cord that are going to stimulate the muscles at the base of the penis to cause ejaculation. And this is where the semen is going to be expelled from the man's body through the urethra and into the vagina, where now can have the two sex cells meet each other. And so when those sex cells meet, again, it's going to be when the sperm and egg will come together. This can occur about 24 hours after ovulation. And that fertilized ovum is going to be what we call a zygote. So here we can see the sperm has met the egg, and now they come together and we've created a zygote. And importantly, it contains the genetic material from both parents. So 23 chromosomes from the man, 23 chromosomes from the woman, and we have 46 chromosomes total. And then as this zygote goes on to develop and divide further, we're going to have a ball of cells, which we call blastocysts. And this is from days 5 through 9, which we see here as our blastocyst is developing. And as it finishes going through the fallopian tube, it's going to enter the uterus and implant itself within that wall of the endometrium. And then between weeks 2 to 8, we're going to term this the embryo. After the embryo, we're going to call it a fetus from weeks 8 out. And so as this fertilized egg develops, this is what we're going to call gestation or pregnancy. And technically, it's going to be the implantation, the embryonic development, fetal growth, and birth. So in humans, the gestational period is 40 weeks or 9 months. And this is going to be starting from the first day of your last period. And we divide pregnancy into 3 trimesters. So we'll look at what distinguishes each of these different trimesters. In the first trimester, this is again the first day of your last period to week 14. And this is going to be the period of greatest embryonic development. So basically, what that means is we start as one tiny cell and we divide millions and millions and billions of times. And now we're going to start to see the development of what we consider an embryo. So this is, if you remember, we talked about those 3 distinct germ layers of embryonic development: the ectoderm, which is going to be the skin and nervous system; the mesoderm, which is going to be the organs and muscular or the muscles; and the endoderm, which is going to be the organs and internal linings of the body. About between weeks 4 and 5 is when the heartbeat is going to begin to beat. And again, at week 8, we're now going to call the embryo a fetus. And to help nourish the ever-growing embryo, we're going to have the placenta, which is an organ that develops alongside the baby, and it's going to act like a sponge-like filter that only allows small molecules through. So the baby doesn't share a direct blood supply with the mother. What it is, the placenta acts like a sponge, so you see it doesn't quite connect to the cardiovascular system of the parent, but it's going to allow the diffusion or the passing through of those small molecules like glucose and oxygen that the baby can use to continue growing. Looking at the second trimester, this is weeks 15 to 28, and this is when you see the development of skin and other sensory organs. So at this point, the baby's going to grow about 11 inches and 1.5 pounds. This is going to be when the mother begins to show, so you can visibly see the pregnancy from the outside. And the mother should feel the fetus move towards the end of the second trimester. And then last, we have the third trimester, so from weeks 29 to birth. And this is when the fetus grows the largest, from about 20 inches to 5 to 9 pounds. You can definitely be more than 9 pounds. Michelle, both of her daughters were high 10 pounds. She likes me to tell everybody that, kind of her badge. But here you can see volumetric CT scan at 37 weeks. You can see just how much space that baby takes up towards the end of it. And so at this point, the mother may experience occasional preparatory contractions. And what a contraction is, it's those muscles of the myometrium are going to begin to contract to prepare and help push out that baby during labor. The cervix is also going to dilate, meaning it's going to open up to accommodate the exiting of that birth canal. So there's going to be a host of maternal changes that occur all throughout pregnancy. Obviously, the uterus is going to enlarge to accommodate the growing fetus, but the ligaments of the pelvis are also going to relax. So if you can see here, we have that pubic symphysis would be here, and we're going to release that hormone relaxin, which is going to allow the connective tissue to soften, and that's going to allow the pelvic girdle to open up to accommodate the body of the baby as it exits. Along with that, we're also going to have an increased curvature of the lumbar vertebrae. So if you remember, that inward curve, both in the cervical and the lumbar area, is going to be known as lordosis. So you're going to see an increase or a hyperlordosis during pregnancy. And this makes sense because you have all this extra weight in the front of the body to help maintain balance. You're going to have to stick the back part or your butt out as well to counterbalance. And that's going to occur through lordosis of those lower lumbar vertebrae. So because of this, sometimes you might have impingement of these lower nerve roots, and you can have pregnancy-induced sciatica. Other things, you're going to see morning sickness. I don't know if we really know exactly why that is, but one idea is that it's from the increased hormones. You're also going to have heartburn because as this baby's growing, it's not only going to be pushing on the organs below, but as well as the organs above. So it's going to crowd the stomach. So here we can see our stomach in red, and it's being compressed. And this compression could push those gastric juices up into the esophagus and cause heartburn. You're also going to could suffer from constipation because progesterone is going to relax the smooth muscles, and it's going to slow down the motility of the digestive system as well. Looking down in the urinary system, the baby's also going to compress the bladder. So here in a normal female body, we can see the bladder nice and large to accommodate urine. When the fetus begins to grow, it's going to compress down on the bladder, and you're going to not nearly hold as much urine as normal. And this is going to be important because if you do a lot of pregnancy massage, if you have someone down on your table for 60 or 90 minutes, it's not going to be uncommon for someone in late-term pregnancy to have to get up during the middle of a massage and use the bathroom. It's perfectly normal, and you'll see that happen. You'll also have changes to the respiratory system. Again, you're going to have reduced lung capacity because you can't expand your lungs quite as much. So to make up for that, we're going to increase respiratory rate. So you'll have to breathe slightly faster to bring in more oxygen to make up for that. And blood volume is going to increase as well. So because we have to nourish this growing baby, we're going to have more red blood cells to carry more glucose and oxygen to it as well. So I think it's at least 50% increase. It might be more. I'll have to double check. And because of this, blood pressure and pulse will also increase just to bring blood cells quicker. And then when the 9 months is over, we're going to have childbirth. So when contractions begin, this is what we term labor. And it goes through 3 stages. So you have that dilation of the cervix. Once it gets to about 10 centimeters, you're ready to push the baby through the birth canal. When you hear about water breaking, there's an amniotic sac. So the sac of fluid that surrounds the baby is going to rupture. And that release of fluid is what we call your water breaking. Next step, obviously the baby's going to be born. And then finally, after the baby's born, we have the afterbirth. So the placenta is going to follow the baby out as well. So sometimes for certain medical reasons, or the baby's too big or something's going on, the baby can't pass through the vaginal canal. So we'll do a cesarean section or a C-section. And this is a surgical procedure. We're going to cut through the lower abdominal pelvic area to remove the fetus through the abdominal wall. And briefly, again, we talked about lactation when we talked about the endocrine system. It's important to remember prolactin is going to be what's responsible for milk production, where oxytocin is going to be the expression or the exiting of the milk through the breast. And there's a special type of milk called colostrum, which is called the first milk. And this is going to be slightly different, where it's very high protein and high antibody liquid secreted within the first few days after giving birth. So you can imagine the baby's lived within a kind of closed environment for 9 months, and now we've exposed it to the world where it's being introduced to all these pathogens, viruses, bacteria. And its immune system hasn't really figured things out yet. So it's going to rely on the mother's immune system through the release of special antibodies to help protect it within that time. So after about a week or so, the milk's going to be turned more from yellow to white, where you're losing that high protein, high antibody source.